Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite members, thank you so much for your dedication and love. I reciprocate both dedication and love right back to you. If you are new to the channel and you begin to like what you are hearing, please try the new hype feature or leave a like and a comment. If you'd like to become part of the Back to Ashes family, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and make sure you set your notification bell to all. That way you don't miss any videos that I upload. With all of that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm. And prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Winter Horror Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. And a quick disclaimer, I do not use an AI voice on this channel. I was born with this voice is my own, and it is also my own talent. For the naysayers, how about swinging by on a live, which I do every Friday. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to our stories. A few years ago, around Christmas, when the days bled into nights so early it felt like living underneath a heavy wool blanket, I decided to go back. Not since Mom passed and Dad sold the house to retire down in Arizona had I returned home. But that December, with nothing tying me down and a rare stretch of days off from work, I found myself booking a flight to the tiny regional airport just outside my hometown. Call it nostalgia or seasonal loneliness, but I wanted to see the place again. I told myself it wasn't about reconnecting with ghosts. It was just curiosity, a quiet yearning to see if the streets and the people I'd left behind all those years ago had stayed the same, or transformed into something unrecognizable. The first few days were uneventful. My aunt, who still lived in town, offered me the spare room under her snug bungalow. Her house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and she had the sort of over-decorated Christmas tree that looked like it belonged in a department store window. I spent the nights on her couch, flipping through old photo albums she dug out, hearing about neighbors who'd long passed away, moved, or gotten divorced. It was cozy in a clawing sort of way, but I quickly grew restless. The town felt small and claustrophobic, like a snow globe I'd outgrown. On the third day, I borrowed her car, a scratched-up Subaru with more grit in the tires than in the engine, and decided to take a drive out to the lake. It wasn't just any lake, it was our lake, the one Dad used to take me and my brother to every summer. Twin Pines Lake, named for the two ancient trees standing guard along its rocky shoreline. The lake had been our escape. Cool, dark water surrounded by dense evergreen trees. The quiet so deep, it made the rest of the world feel imaginary. In winter, it transformed, its surface freezing over, though never thick enough to skate. The surrounding forest coating it in a dust of snow. I remembered it as a place of beauty, untouched, secretive. I needed to see it again, to reassure myself that something in the world hadn't changed. The weather that day was mild, or as mild as December gets in the mountains. Barely an inch of snow clung to the ground, more decoration than obstacle. The sky was a heavy slate gray that swallowed the horizon and made everything seem closer than it was. I left in the late morning, figuring I'd have time to wander around the lake, snap a few pictures for my aunt, and make it back before sunset. I didn't exactly tell her where I was going, just that I wanted to stretch my legs and explore some of the old haunts. She waved me off with a thermos of coffee and a tin of Christmas cookies, her only warning to watch out for black eyes. The drive was uneventful, The Subaru's heater wheezed out lukewarm air as the road climbed steadily, winding through stretches of pine forest. The closer I got to the lake, the fewer cars I saw. By the time I turned off the main road onto the narrow, unmarked path, I hadn't passed another vehicle in at least 20 minutes. It felt like I was entering another world, one that existed outside of time. The parking lot was a little more than a clearing at the end of the path, a patch of dirt and gravel bordered by a rusted guardrail. A few other cars were there, including a silver SUV coated in a thin layer of frost. Its windows were dark. I couldn't tell if someone was inside or if it had been abandoned. I shrugged it off. Plenty of people came out here for day hikes or to fish in the stream that fed into the lake. Though it wasn't exactly the kind of weather that encouraged lingering. I parked a few spaces away and killed the engine. The sudden silence was startling, as if the car had been the last tether to civilization itself. The trail to the lake was just as I remembered. Narrow, winding, swallowed by woods. Snow muffled my footsteps, and every so often, I heard faint rustling in the trees. Squirrels, maybe, or birds startled by my intrusion. When I finally reached the tree line, the side of the lake stopped me cold. It was just as beautiful as I remembered. Maybe even more so. Cloaked in winter's quiet majesty. The water wasn't fully frozen, just a thin sheet of ice creeping in from the edges. Its surface fractured like a spider web. The twin pines still stood, their boughs heavy with snow, and beyond them, the mountains loomed, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds. I felt a pang of something. Nostalgia, sadness. I couldn't tell. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos and stood at the water's edge, watching the ice shimmer like broken glass. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of ice shifting or the soft hiss of wind through the trees. I should have felt at peace, but instead I didn't. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, that instinct you get when someone's standing too close in an empty room. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves or isolation playing tricks, but the feeling lingered. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. No movement, no sign of life, just still, indifferent forest. The SUV in the lot flickered through my mind, but I dismissed it. Its owner was probably hiking somewhere nearby, oblivious to me as I was to them. By the time I made my way back toward the shoreline, the sun had burned through most of the gray clouds. I could hear faint voices and laughter from across the lake. A pair of fishermen near the pines, bundled in thick coats, and a few others wandering the trails. It was oddly comforting. Not crowded, but enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. By midday, the sky darkened again. The fishermen packed up and left. I overheard two hikers coming down the trail, voices tight with worry. "Storm's coming," one said. "They just put out an advisory. Whiteout conditions." "Should have checked that radar," the other muttered. They passed without a glance, hurrying toward the lot. That uneasy feeling in my gut suddenly made sense. A storm. I turned for one last look at the lake. The water had gone dark under the heavy sky. A primal voice in my head whispered, "Go." By the time I reached the halfway point on the trail, snow had already started falling. At first it was gentle, delicate. Then suddenly it wasn't. Within minutes, the flurries grew heavy, swirling on the wind and sticking to the ground in thick, wet clumps. The trail blurred, dissolving into white. I pushed on, heart pounding, When I finally stumbled into the parking lot, it was unrecognizable. 6 inches of snow, drifts piling against the rustic guardrail. Most of the cars were gone. Only two remained. Mine, half buried near the front end, and the silver SUV. Its engine was idling, its cabin empty. No footprints. For a moment, dread gripped me so hard I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to investigate. Whatever was going on, it wasn't my problem. I made a beeline for my car, fumbling with the keys as the wind screamed around me. By the time I got inside, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I started the engine, turned the heater up full blast, and forced myself to breathe. Then I reversed out and started down the narrow mountain road. Snow fell faster than I could blink. The tracks of other vehicles vanished under it. The wind howled through the trees, rattling branches, sending flurries across my windshield. And then I saw it. A car, half submerged in the ditch. Its driver waving frantically behind a frosted window. "I'm stuck. Can you help?" they shouted. I rolled down the window, the wind slapping my face. "I'll call for help when I can. Just hang tight." They nodded, desperation written in every movement. I drove on. There was nothing else I could do. By the time I reached the base of the hill, 3 more vehicles were stranded along the roadside. Their drivers huddled inside, waiting. I slowed each time but didn't stop. Halfway up the final incline, my own tires lost traction. The Subaru fishtailed, skidding sideways before sliding off the road and into a ditch with a heavy thud. Silence. Outside, the snow thickened. The car was being buried inch by inch. I wrapped myself in the emergency blanket, trying to stay calm, trying to believe someone would come. Hours passed. The wind howled. The car shook with each violent gust. Snow piled higher, pressing against the windows until it felt like a tomb. I turned the car off to save gas, only restarting it when the cold became unbearable. My breath fogged the air. The blanket clung damp and useless to my shoulders. Sometimes I thought I saw lights in the woods, small, flickering like distant lanterns, but maybe they were other stranded drivers, maybe something else. I couldn't tell. By the second night, the storm had returned with a vengeance. The Subaru groaned under the wind's assault. I burned tea lights in a tin to make a pocket of warmth. It barely helped. When the last candle guttered out, I curled into myself and prayed for dawn. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I heard was the low growl of engines. Snowmobiles. Headlights pierced the storm, bright, unwavering. Relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. I forced the door open and waved frantically. A rescuer stopped beside me, bundled head to toe, his voice calm through the muffling snow. "You okay?" I nodded, too choked up to answer. He marked my car with a bright orange flash. "More help's on the way," he said, then vanished into the trees. By daylight, rescue teams found our 20 cars stranded along the road. Drivers cold, but alive. All except 2. The news later reported that an elderly woman had died after wandering away from her vehicle that first night. She'd been found not far from the lake, frozen and alone. I thought back to the idling SUV, the empty cabin, and those faint lights flickering in the woods. I still wonder if she was one of them. Even now, years later, I can't forget the way those lights seemed to hover, watching, waiting, as if the forest itself had been keeping count. I live on an island in Maine that's about an hour ferry ride away from civilization. The boat comes 3 days a week, typically, but there are a lot of times they cancel due to the weather. It's a mild trip, not much to talk about aside from the beautiful views you get on both shores. It's the kind of stereotype you'd find in a Stephen King novel. Isolated watery depths, quaint little townships. It's cute, but for certain lifestyles, it can be pretty inconvenient. One winter, my best friend was having a bachelor party weekend that I could not miss. It wasn't an option. We were getting together for unspeakable debauchery, the kind of stuff you only see in movies. Now, it's Maine, in the middle of January. There are mountains of snow and violent wind swells. My car time was limited, but it was the boat and the plane that worried me most. When I checked both statuses, they were green. Everyone was operating as normal. I loaded my bags, navigated the icy roadways, and paid the parking fee. Just one look at the white caps had me scratching my head. Had I read the status wrong? There was no way a ferry was working in these conditions. But, lo and behold, the status held up. Still green on the website. The person I called confirmed it, too. I could actually see the ferry returning from its previous trip. It rocked a bit on the roaring froth, but that almost calmed my nerves. It didn't seem to be as affected as I thought it would be. I'm not a sea captain, so what did I know? The people arriving offloaded and seemed to be in good spirits from what I could see. I scanned their faces, ghost white expressions, bugged out eyes, clenched fists, or anything emotional. But no one seemed disturbed by their voyage. I doubled down and boarded the moment I was able to. Missing that bachelor weekend was not an option. I'd have drowned in the depths of the ocean before letting that happen. Needless to say, that damn captain should have canceled that day. We departed from the port and cruised uneventfully for a while. There weren't many of us on board. I played on my phone while others made casual small talk. People going to the mainland for events like me, others for grocery trips and supplies. As we all collectively settled in, the ferry began tipping back and forth. It leaned one direction a little too far, and everyone went quiet as they noticed it. Then it swung back the other way, and the same thing happened. Beyond the viewing windows, I saw towering whitecaps colliding in front of us. The water was beginning to lap over the sides of the boat. It was a complete whiteout in all directions, and land was nowhere to be seen. The captain made an announcement over the PA system that things were rougher than normal, but assured us everything was fine. He insisted we stay calm, stay alert, and put our faith in him. He also said we needed to remain seated. That last part deflated morale a bit, especially as we watched the swells jump over the sides of the boat, some easily over 6 feet high. Scratch what I said earlier. Thank God I'm not a sea captain. We kept rocking back and forth for the rest of the trip, dipping a little more each time, the waves tossing us in whatever direction they pleased. During one particularly sharp teeter, the pressure from the water sent a huge crack through one of the viewing windows. All those passengers had to evacuate their seats, but they had to time their movements with the rocking of the ship. The first people who panicked and stood up too soon were thrown to the floor so hard it knocked the wind out of them. They waited for the boat to tip the other way, then bolted for different seats. The crack continued to worsen, but the windows never gave in. The staff promised it was tempered, double-pane glass. They even said it could stop a low-caliber bullet. I looked out at the ferocious ocean beyond the glass and laughed. Who cares if it can stop a .22? Can it dam up the Atlantic? No, that glass was nothing in comparison. Looking back, maybe the crew was just as shocked and needed to tell themselves something for comfort. It didn't end there, though. The captain said we were lagging a bit, but still making good time, which no one reacted to. We were too busy trying not to vomit on each other from the nauseating voyage. I started to doubt the legendary bachelor party and regretted tempting Mother Nature. She didn't care what I did. She just laughed at me. The boat rocked again, but this time, it tipped so far that I had to put my foot on the wall next to me to stop myself from falling into it. The wall became the floor, and then the floor became a wall. Fortunately, I sat solo at the start of the trip, and no one had gotten close to me during the chaos. No one came crashing down on me from further up the row. I imagine if there had been anything loose, carts, luggage, whatever, it would have been like getting stoned to death every time the ferry shifted. It finally started to clear up after that. Thankfully so, because we couldn't have handled much more. We were inches from being tossed right through those windows and into the frigid waters beyond them. It would have been worse than anything I can imagine. The glass would have absolutely annihilated our bodies as we passed through it. The sucking vacuum of the ocean would have ripped us into the froth and debris, dragged into raging currents. After that, who knows? Drowning? Water so cold it feels like ice cubes in your lungs? Having every bone broken by the force of the waves, or outright freezing to death? The possibilities are bleak, but they never came to fruition. We made it to shore, docked safely, and somehow I even made my flight on time. I'm sorry, you guys, I have to pause for a second. That story creeped me out. I have a major phobia of the ocean. I would have had a heart attack on that ferry. I don't know about you all. That gave me goosebumps. Back to the stories. I don't know why I had that sudden urge to go back out to the old cabin. It had been years since I set foot on that land, let alone spent a night there. But one morning in mid-January, I woke up with that cold itch in my bones, like something was calling me back. I made an attempt to rope in some good company. My brother outright laughed at me. My cousin was busy, and my folks weren't about to go hiking through knee-deep snow just to sit in a drafty old shack. Even my wife, who usually humored my whims, wrinkled her nose at the idea. "Yeah, you can go have your little mountain adventure out there by yourself," she said, tossing a pair of thick socks into my bag. "Just don't freeze to death." So it was going to be just me. I packed up my truck with all the supplies I'd need: food, ammo, whiskey, firewood, and enough blankets to smother a bear. The drive was long, cutting through endless stretches of pine and aspen. The road was narrow, the snow thickening around it. Civilization fell away mile by mile until it was just me in the wild. By the time I reached the old back roads, the world was nothing but white. A fresh storm had rolled through, laying down an untouched blanket of powder. The tires groaned through the drifts, slipping and catching, the truck lurching forward in fits. Twice I had to get out and dig myself free with the old shovel I kept in the back. The silence was thick and heavy. The only sounds were my own breathing and the scrape of metal against the packed ice. It took a lot longer than I expected, but eventually I made it there. The cabin sat where it always had, tucked between two towering trees, its weathered logs swallowed up in snow. The place looked untouched, exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing: footprints. They crisscrossed the front porch, half covered by fresh snowfall, but definitely still there. Deep impressions, too regular for an animal. I stared at them for a long moment, my breath pluming out in front of me. Then I quickly shook it off. It could have easily been old tracks from a hunter or a lost hiker just passing through. I hauled my gear inside and saw the dust laying thick on every surface. No sign of any recent activity. It was bitterly cold as a tomb. I wasted no time, dropped my bags, grabbed the axe, and trudged out to the woodshed. The lock was still intact. Inside, stacks of firewood waited for me exactly as I remembered. But when I stepped back onto the porch, something made me pause. The front door. I swore I'd shut it when I went to the woodshed, but now it hung open. Just a crack. All right. Well, the wind. Yeah, it had to be the wind. I went inside and bolted the door. I was alone, right? I kept myself busy. The first order of business was warmth. I loaded the fireplace with wood and got a fire roaring. But as I crouched to feed the flames, something gnawed at me. Those ashes in there, they weren't that old. A dark mound of spent wood still clumped together, not yet broken into fine dust, and beneath it, the faint glow of red. A fire had definitely burned in here not that long ago. I straightened slowly, scanning the room. The place had been cold when I entered. No heat, no scent of smoke. But the ash told me a different story. Maybe my cousin had used the place and forgotten to mention it. It wasn't unheard of, but still, more thoughts clung to me, chewing at the edges of my comfort. I moved on, stacked some wood by the hearth, unpacked my supplies, and set a bottle of whiskey on the counter. My eyes flicked to the sink. A mug sat there, and it wasn't mine. I walked over. Dried coffee residue clung to the ceramic dark rings at the bottom. It hadn't been washed, not even rinsed. My pulse beat in my throat. I checked the back door, now unlocked. Then the bedroom. The sheets were pulled back. The pillow creased from some kind of weight, and a single indentation marked the mattress. Someone had slept here. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of silence pressing in on me. I wasn't alone. Maybe not at that moment, but somebody had been here recently. Somebody who didn't clean up after themselves. I should have left then. Should have grabbed my bag, stomped back to the truck, and driven until I hit a gas station or a town. Anything with streetlights and people. But I didn't. Instead, I did what a man does when he's alone in the middle of nowhere and confronted with something he doesn't like. I ignored it. Honestly, I just assumed a family member had been in the cabin without letting anyone else know. I went about my business, whistling under my breath like that would keep the feeling at bay. I cooked a steak on the old gas range, boiled some potatoes, and put some music on the radio. Something slow and warm. The cabin felt a lot less empty with the station coming through. Outside, The snow had started up again, thick and heavy, a steady curtain swallowing up the trees. The whiskey burned in my chest as I sat at the table, just watching it fall. For the first time since arriving, I felt myself start to relax. Then, the floor creaked upstairs. I stopped chewing and sat perfectly still. Another creak. A deliberate shift of weight. Someone was up there. I reached for my gun. I always brought a 6-shot .38 special with me. My fingers closed around the grip. Hard. The music was still playing, and that was what made it worse. Because whoever was up there was moving in time with the song. I let the record play for a few seconds longer, just listening. The footsteps weren't random. They weren't wandering. They were matching the rhythm, step by step, beat by beat. Like whoever was up there was trying to mask their movement. I stood up, knocking back my chair. The music thankfully covered the sound, but I felt the vibration through the floorboards. Then the footsteps hesitated. I reached out and yanked the power cord from the wall. The song cut off instantly. The footsteps continued, heavy now, purposeful, moving toward the stairs. I leveled my gun. My voice came out steady, but my hand was sweating on the grip. "I know you're up there," I called out. "Make this easy and just come down, now, and I won't shoot you." Silence. Then I heard the first step. Slow. Then another. A shape emerged from the darkness. A man, thin and unshaven, bundled in layers of ragged clothes. His breath was so foul it made my eyes water. His eyes darted to the gun in my hand, then to the door. "I'm not here to cause you any trouble," he said. "I just needed a place to sleep." I didn't lower my gun. "That why you were sneaking around?" He hesitated. "I just didn't want to scare you." "Well, you're doing a damn good job of that." We stood there, the fire snapping and popping behind me. The man swayed slightly on his feet, looked like he hadn't eaten in days. A long moment stretched between us. Then, against every survival instinct screaming in my head, I moved to the counter and grabbed the plate I hadn't finished. I held it out. "Eat." He blinked at me. You serious?" "Eat," I repeated. "Then get the hell out." He took the plate, fingers shaking, sat at the table, hunched over the food like a starving animal, shoveling it into his mouth. I kept the gun on him the entire time. When he was done, I gestured to the door. "The woodshed's empty. You can sleep there." He looked at me, eyes dark and unreadable, then stood up, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and nodded. Thank you." I followed him out into the cold. He trudged out to the shed, ducked inside, and shut the door. I stood there a long time just watching. Then I locked the cabin door behind me and waited. For obvious reasons, I didn't really sleep. I sat in bed with the gun on my chest, just listening. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Every so often, the wind would howl through the trees, and the old logs would creak in protest. I wasn't listening for the wind. I was listening for him. The woodshed was only 20 yards from the cabin. not too far. If he changed his mind and decided he wanted more than a meal and a roof for the night, I'd hear him coming. At least that's what I told myself. At some point, exhaustion won out. My eyes closed, the gun still in my grip. Morning came. The fire was dead. The air so cold my breath came out in huge plumes. I sat up slowly, every muscle stiff. My first thought was the woodshed. I went to the window. The door was still shut. No footprints in the snow leading away. I threw on my coat, boots, and hat, and stepped out onto the porch. Morning was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after a heavy snowfall. My boots crunched the ice as I walked over to the shed. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. "Hey," I called out. "Time to go." Nothing. I unlatched the door and pulled it open. Empty. The old blankets I'd left in there were tossed in the corner, but the man was gone. No tracks in the snow. No sign that he had ever left. I stood there staring at that blank stretch of white leading off into the trees. There should have been footprints. There should have been something, but there wasn't. I packed up that morning, fast. Didn't bother finishing the food, didn't care about cleaning up. I threw everything in that truck and got the hell out. Weeks later, I heard a rumor. A guy I knew from town mentioned something about a drifter causing trouble in the area. A man breaking into homes, scaring families, caught watching people through their windows in the dead of night. The description of him? Dead on. For some reason, I didn't say anything. I didn't mention the cabin. I didn't mention the woodshed. And I didn't mention the fact that no matter how deep the snow had been, no matter how heavy it fell overnight, I never saw his footprints leave. I never saw him leave at all. I'm not one for going on hikes. I'd much rather spend my days inside, cozied up with a good book and a cup of coffee. But when my boyfriend Greg suggested that we go on a winter hike, I reluctantly agreed. He'd always been the adventurous type, while I was content to stay in my comfort zone. I just wanted to make him happy, and if this was how, then I'd do my best to act excited about it. The drive up the mountain was gorgeous, and I was relieved to see other cars parked at the trailhead. We grabbed our backpacks from the trunk and headed onto the trail. The hike was only supposed to take a few hours there and back, and it was still early by the time we started, so I wasn't too worried about it getting dark while we were out there. The hike was beautiful. The snow was like a blanket of soft white, coating everything around us. The crisp air was invigorating, and we took turns leading the way, crunching through the snow and making our way deeper into the woods. We were having an amazing time, and I was actually really glad I agreed to go. I felt free and alive, despite the air growing colder and colder as time went on. But then something went wrong. Possibly the only thing I hadn't even considered a possibility. We got separated. I had stopped to tie my shoe and take a drink of water, and I thought Greg noticed me stop. But I guess he hadn't, because when I looked up, he was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere. I called out for him, but he didn't respond. Panic began to set in as I realized how quickly I'd become turned around. I tried following his tracks, but the snow started coming down heavier, and soon I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. I tried retracing my steps, but it was no use. I was completely lost. Fear settled in like a heavy weight on my chest. I didn't know what to do. I was dressed in a thin coat and jeans, and I knew I wouldn't last long in the harsh winter conditions. The weather app had said it was going to be clear and sunny, and since I knew nothing about hiking or wilderness survival, I hadn't prepared for the possibility of the weather suddenly changing. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that Greg would come back for me. The same thoughts raced through my head over and over again. But what if he was lost too? What if we were both stuck out here in the middle of nowhere? What if he still hadn't realized I wasn't behind him anymore? I pushed those thoughts aside and decided I had to keep moving. I hoped that if I kept walking, I'd come across something familiar, or maybe even catch up to Greg. Walking kept me warm, too. I trudged through the snow, my legs growing tired with each step. My fingers and toes began to feel a tingling numbness, and my head pounded from the cold. The snow whipped against my face, and I started to consider just giving up. And then I heard it. The snow crunching behind me, followed by the loud snap of a twig. Something was following me. For a moment, I thought maybe it was Greg. Maybe he'd found me. But I was very, very wrong. I turned, and there it was. A bear. It was massive. Its fur a shaggy mess of brown, and it looked angry. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. My mind went blank as I tried to remember what you were supposed to do when you come across a bear. But the fear was too strong. Its eyes were locked on me, and a jolt of primal terror shot through my body. Fight or flight is real, and my body chose flight. I started to run, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the bear behind me, its growls echoing through the woods. I didn't dare look back. I just kept moving, hoping to put as much distance between us as possible. But the bear was much faster. I cried out for help when I heard it getting closer. I knew I was no match for a wild animal like that, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I spotted a tree and scrambled up as fast as I could. My hand slipped on the rough bark, but somehow I managed to pull myself onto a branch, panting and shaking. I looked down at the bear and prayed it wouldn't come up after me. I knew bears would climb, but I was desperate to believe this one wouldn't try. It paced below me, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, growling and snorting. I couldn't stay up there forever, but I didn't know what else to do. I was trapped. Hours seemed to pass, and the bear showed no sign of leaving. My hope began to fade. I was freezing, hungry, scared, and now worried about Greg, alone somewhere out there, unaware of the danger. Then I heard a shout. It was faint at first, but I called back, my voice hoarse from the cold. It was Greg. He was rushing through the trees toward me, relief flooding his face when he saw me up in the tree. I yelled for him to stop and warned him about the bear. Thankfully, it hadn't noticed him yet. Greg looked at me, determination in his eyes, the kind of look that told me he was about to do something reckless. I shouted for him not to, but he didn't listen. He called out to the bear, waving his arms to scare it away. The bear growled, but miraculously turned and disappeared into the woods. I climbed down carefully, and Greg wrapped me in his arms. I was safe, but I was still terrified. We had to get out of there, and there was no telling if the bear might come back. We started walking, trying to find our way back to the trailhead. We were both exhausted and on edge, but we pushed forward. I was grateful for Greg's presence, but I couldn't shake the fear that something else might happen. and then it did. Greg screamed suddenly. I turned to see him on the ground, writhing in pain. My heart raced as I rushed over. His foot had gotten stuck on a tree root hidden beneath the snow, and his ankle was broken, badly. It looked twisted, hanging in a way that made me want to vomit. I tried to lift him, but he was too heavy, too weak to stand. Desperate, I grabbed the emergency blanket from his backpack and spread it on the snow and rolled him onto it. I tied two corners together and began dragging him through the snow. Every inch felt impossible, but I was determined. I had to save him, just like he'd saved me. The snow had calmed, but the wind still howled through the trees. I was soaked, freezing, and my body screamed for rest. But I pushed on, inch by inch, step by step. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it. The trailhead. Tears streamed down my face as I screamed with relief. We made it. We were safe. I dragged Greg to the car and drove as fast as I could to the nearest hospital. By the time we arrived, he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Doctors treated his broken ankle, but he lost the tips of a few fingers to frostbite. I was treated for hypothermia, but otherwise escaped with only minor cuts and bruises. We both survived, but we were never the same after that day. I still think about it often, about how we saw other cars at the trailhead, but never a single person on the trail. I wonder if they got lost too. Maybe they made it out safely. I hope so. I guess going out of your comfort zone isn't always a good thing, but I learned something valuable that day. I learned about my own strength. Nothing could stop me. Greg was alive because I refused to give up, and I thank God every single day for giving me the courage to keep going. There's a special kind of magic in the silence after a snowstorm. As a kid, I felt like time itself froze, like the snow wasn't a weather event, but a gift from the universe, a reprieve from the grinding monotony of school and the endless rules of just being young. Snow days were rare enough to feel sacred, and when one would come, it turned everything electric. I remember the mornings best, snow casting a soft, pearly light through the blinds, and that first delicious moment when the news would come. School was canceled. The air felt cleaner on those days, the cold sharper, in a way that woke you up more than any alarm clock ever could. I'd pull on my boots and puffy coat, scarf wound tight enough to stifle my breath, and head out into the neighborhood before the rest of the world had even begun to stir. It was tradition. The first thing I did before snowball fights with my friends, before sledding down the big hill at the park, before I even touched the cocoa my mom left warming on the stove, was shovel driveways. Not just my family's, mind you. Ours could wait. I'd hit the neighbors' places first, moving fast before anybody else got the same idea, or worse, decided to clear the snow themselves. There was this narrow window after a storm, maybe an hour or two, when the snow still sat pure and untouched. I learned to capitalize on it. I knocked on those same doors every year, a route ingrained in me as deeply as the back roads I rode my bike on during summer. Old Mrs. Hendrick across the street was always my first stop. She didn't trust snowblowers, said they messed up the natural layer of her yard. Next were the Thompsons, 3 houses down. They lived there since I was born and tipped better than anyone else on the block. Then the Peters, who always had their driveway packed down into ice by the time I got there because their kids were too lazy to shovel. And so on and so on. House after house until my arms burned and my fingers went numb, even through my gloves. I make it sound endless, but it was honestly maybe 2 hours of work. At least for a breakneck kid like me. It wasn't all about the money. Not really. Sure, I liked having a little cash to spend on comic books or candy bars, but it was more than that. There was a rhythm to shoveling, the scrape of metal on concrete, the satisfying way a driveway transformed from a buried wasteland to a clean slate beneath my boots. And there was something about the quiet, working in that stillness, that I just loved. The world muffled by snow. Even the sound of cars were muted, as if the storm had pressed pause on reality itself. Most of the time, I was the only one out there. Maybe a few dog walkers bundled up and shuffling along with red noses and puffs of white breath trailing behind them. Otherwise, it felt like I had the entire block to myself, and the solitude never bothered me. If anything, it felt kind of cozy. I'd work for hours, moving from house to house, until the snow was stacked in neat mounds along the edges of every driveway. I can still picture all of those houses, every door, every window, every crack in the pavement, as familiar to me as the lines of my own palms. I knew which ones to skip. The grumpy old men who'd bark at you to get off their property, or the cheapskates who'd offer a handful of nickels for an hour's work. But most of my neighbors were kind, even the ones who didn't hire me. I could count on a few smiles, maybe a cookie or two from Mrs. Hendrick. Sometimes, if the snow was bad enough, somebody would even give me a extra $5 just for braving it out there. That winter, the snow had really piled high, a heavy, dense blanket that muffled the world and turned my neighborhood into a frozen postcard. I was 15 and used to the rhythm of those snow days, the gleeful anarchy of no school, the scramble to bundle up, and the steady grind of shoveling driveways for cash. It was honest work, the kind that left your muscles aching and your wallet heavier by the end of the day. That year, though, there was a new house to add to my circuit. At the end of the block stood the old Marshall place, a squat rancher that had been empty for years. Nobody really talked about why it sat so long with that for sale sign out front. It was just one of those places, the kind of house you walk past a little quicker without knowing why. A few months back, someone finally moved in, a middle-aged man and woman, reclusive from what I've heard. I hadn't really seen much of them myself. They didn't come to block parties or wave at neighbors. If it hadn't been for the faint flicker of their television at night, you'd think the place was still abandoned. That morning, after clearing the other houses, I stood at the edge of their driveway. The snow was untouched. I hesitated, my breath hanging in the air like a question. 20 quick bucks, I told myself. Maybe 30 if they tip well. Money was money, and if they weren't going to shovel it themselves, somebody had to. I knocked on the door, my knuckles echoing against the hollow wood. It took a long time for anyone to answer, long enough that I was about to turn and leave when I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps and the click of a deadbolt. The door cracked open just wide enough for me to see them. The man stood first, tall and pale, the kind of washed-out look that made him seem like an old photograph left too long in the sun. His wife stepped into view a moment later, her face almost identical to his in its gauntness. They weren't twins exactly, but there was something unnerving about how alike they were. Same sharp cheekbones, same sunken eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked. I explained about shoveling, rattling off my usual pitch about how much I charged and how quickly I could get it done. They both stared at me a beat too long, their expressions unreadable. Then the woman gave a small nod, almost to herself. "All right," the man said. "Go ahead." The door shut without another word, and I got to work. The snow was heavy, packed down with every step, and it took longer than I expected to clear even half the driveway. About 20 minutes in, I saw the woman emerge from the house, bundled in a long coat and scarf. She walked down to her car, an old boxy sedan, and backed out slowly onto the street before driving toward town. I watched her go, tires crunching on the snow, and felt a flicker of unease. Something about the way she moved, mechanical, robotic, set my nerves jangling. But I shook it off. People are weird sometimes, I told myself, but not a big deal. I had almost finished when the front door creaked open again. The man stepped out onto the porch. He was dressed for the weather now, in a thick coat and boots, but he didn't make any move to help. He just stood there, watching me. "Almost done," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded, but didn't reply. After a moment, he came down the steps, started pacing along the edge of the driveway. "You do this every year?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's a good way to make some money. People around here know me so." I trailed off, realizing how stupid that sounded. He grunted, stopped walking, and turned to face me. "You charge 20? 25, I said quickly. I wasn't about to let him lowball me after all that effort. "I thought it was 20, he said again. "Your drive's much bigger than I thought, plus the snow's extra high over here." He nodded along, eyes unreadable. "No chance of 20? "Sorry," was all I said. He tilted his head, considering, then nodded again. "All right. You want to come inside when you're done? Warm up with some hot chocolate?" The way he said it twisted my stomach. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't neighborly. It felt like a trap, like a spider offering tea to a fly. He hovered behind me, impossibly tall. Every instinct screamed at me to run. No thanks," I said, keeping my voice as polite as I could. "I've got a few more driveways to do before it dumps again." He didn't push it, just shrugged and said he'd go get the money, then disappeared back inside. I tried to get my hands to stop shaking, shoveled faster now, working double time to finish and get the hell out of there. Something about that man was just wrong. The way he watched me, like he was sizing me up, like I wasn't a kid with a shovel, but a problem he was trying to solve. I paused to wipe sweat from my forehead, and that's when I saw him again. He was at the window now, the one in the living room. Curtains pulled back just enough for me to see his face. He was holding a camera, one with a long lens, and he was taking pictures of me. My stomach turned to ice. I dropped the shovel and took a step back, boots slipping on the packed snow. I watched the camera's flash pop twice. He didn't even care that I could see him, like he wanted me to know what he was doing. I turned toward the street, ready to leave, but then I saw the car. The woman was back. Her sedan crawled slowly up the road. She stopped at the base of the driveway, engine idling, and just sat there, staring at me through the windshield. She slowly pulled in, like she was savoring the approach. Tires crunched on the snow. I stood there awkwardly, shovel still in hand, unsure if I should just leave, but something told me to stay. Maybe it was the way her gaze locked on me as she parked, unblinking. She stepped out, the cold air seeming sharper with her presence, every breath visible like pale ribbons. She nodded at me, lips twitching into a thin, strange smile. "All finished?" she asked. Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. Tried again. Uh, yeah, I'm done. I just came to let you know." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes scanned the driveway, inspecting my work. She nodded again, satisfied. At least she seemed to be. Then she tilted her head. "Did you go inside?" The question hit me like a slap. "No," I said, too quickly. "No, I didn't. Why would I go inside?" "That's a shame," she said softly. "You would have had so much fun." The words made my stomach twitch. There was definitely something wrong here. I took a step back without realizing it, my boots sliding on the packed snow. Before I could say anything, the front door creaked open again. The man stepped out, now holding a neat stack of bills in his gloved hand. He didn't say anything as he walked toward me, each step deliberate, crunched through the snow. "Here," he said, holding out the money. I reached for it, but he didn't let go right away. Instead, he started counting the bills aloud, one at a time, his voice slow and deliberate. 1, 2, 3. He was paying me in $1 bills. By the time he hit 25, I was ready to bolt. But he still didn't release the cash. Instead, he leaned in slightly, eyes boring into mine. "Are you sure you don't want to come inside?" he asked again, voice colder now. "No," I said, almost ready to scream. "I've got to go." The change in his face was instant, like a switch flipping. His expression twisted into a snarl. "Then get off my property. Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I stuffed the money in my pocket and sprinted down the driveway. I didn't look back, not even when I thought I heard the woman laughing, not even when I felt the weight of their stares pressing into my back. When I finally reached my house, I locked the door behind me and vowed never to set foot near that place again. Never waved, never offered to shovel, just avoided it like the plague. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true winter horror stories. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continuous dedication. I cannot thank you enough. And as I always like to say, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a voice. And I'd also be sitting here talking to myself. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.